All right, get to celebrate the little things. Inside out. Let's start with the question, how do we measure physical growth?
Inch by inch.
Inch by inch. And, typically when we're little kids, how tall are you now? How tall are you now? That question usually eventually stops, right? And then we start measuring something else. So obviously we have a physical way via rulers or scales or other ways to measure our physical growth. And what about emotional growth? Do we have a way to measure emotional growth? Okay, maturity, good. Hang on to that one.
Through change.
Through change.
How angry am I now?
So in other words, via behavior, we start to understand where our emotional growth is. And none of us ever throw temper tantrums, right? So our emotional growth is actually seen typically by behavior, especially when something has triggered us. How about mental or intellectual growth? SQ21, which is a book that we've all been reading, and I mentioned, probably about a year ago, and the practitioners have been reading that book. How else do, and this is more in the educational environment, how else do we measure grades, tests? Yeah, and really in life, we all probably still continue to read or watch movies or still learn things that we never knew before. And when we know those things, then we begin applying them, right? In other words, we use them in our lives. So you start seeing skills being applied based on what we have learned. Spiritual growth. It's going to teach me about spiritual growth. How do we measure spiritual growth?
I measure it by how I respond to change coming at me.
Very good. How you respond to change in your life. Okay. And then tell me a little bit about if spiritual growth were on the lesser part of the scale versus the greater part of the scale, how would that be different?
If it's on the lesser part of the scale, things come at me overwhelmingly.
Okay. For you, when there's too much change, it overwhelms you. And so spiritual growth, you would see that if you continued to move yourself up the scale, regardless of what was coming at you, you'd still be able to sustain and not be overwhelmed. Is that what I gather from you? Okay.
How much peace you have in your life?
How much peace you have in your life. Nice.
How often I can respond with love?
Beautiful. How often can I respond with love? And frankly, just be love, right? Always.
How much appreciation I have in my life?
How much appreciation and gratitude that you express in your life.
How well I listen to other people.
How well you listen to other people. And of course, my last lesson was on deep listening, which there are many forms of listening. So the deep listening, not listening in order to react, but listening as in taking in and being present with what's being said.
How about grace and synchronicity?
Grace and synchronicity. Beautiful.
How often I can be of service to others?
How often you can be of service to others. Wow, you guys are stars. And when you're in service, the giving and the receiving and the circulation and what that does to the heart and the essence of the presence that you are in the community. Beautiful. All right, so hang on to those thoughts. And now I'm going back to maturity. How can you tell when somebody has gained any particular maturity? Let's say physical maturity. How do you know?
Gray hair.
Gray hair shows that you've matured. Now, a kid who's 11 might say they're matured when they were 16 because they got their driver's license. And then they would say they matured when they were 18 because they're an adult. And then 21, okay, you get it. And how about emotional maturity?
Ability to respond instead of react.
Yes, when somebody pushes your buttons, your emotional maturity about how you respond. And mental intellectual maturity?
Degrees.
Being able to solve problems is an example.
Number of degrees.
Number of degrees? Well, from the outside, okay, I get that. From the inside, yeah. Spiritual maturity. How much grace? Now, how is grace seen if you're looking at somebody else and saying you're spiritually mature? How would you see that grace?
How they respond to life rather than react.
How they respond to life. So there's something about behavior and essence of the beingness of that individual, right?
Expecting what is.
Expecting what is. Not getting overwhelmed by the change, but just allowing it to flow, right? Acceptance. So as life and things are thrown at you, you've got a positive acceptance of that which just is.
And acceptance of others.
And acceptance of others. In other words, wherever they're at and what's ever going on for them, being able to just accept them where they are.
Knowing you have a choice.
And knowing you have a choice on how you respond, how you think, how you react.
Non-judgment.
Non-judgment. And you see that by not maybe hearing about judgments and opinions and how, in other words, how the person accepts those other things and doesn't move into the judgment of classifying or what's right, what's wrong.
Responding with love.
Responding with love.
Realizing you don't have all the answers.
Aha. A oneness that may not be all the answers are right here and now, but maybe a faith that the answers will be revealed.
Surrendering to something greater.
Surrendering to something greater. Gosh, this is great. I wish I was writing a book right now. A forever grateful heart. Beautiful. In constant gratitude. Constant gratitude for what is. Excellent.
Being happy with what you have.
Being happy with what is, what you have. So, how do you recognize for yourself spiritual stagnation versus spiritual growth based on those things we just talked about?
When ego runs the show.
When ego runs the show, you know it's time for more spiritual practice.
When fear seems to take precedence.
When fear becomes the number one thing you're thinking about, contemplating, or responding to.
Repetition of non-beneficial actions.
Repetition of non-beneficial actions. That was really good, Sherry.
Having anger. Being angry.
Living in anger, you know that there's something left to heal. Mm-hmm.
When you think you have all the answers.
When you think you have all the answers, which we had talked about before, yes?
Unwillingness to change.
An unwillingness to change.
Watching Fox News.
Okay. State of the Union, so to speak. So, we talked about maturity. And maturity tends to give us the idea that we have arrived. But technically, whether it's physical maturity, I have relatives who say, how can you run for an hour? And then, by the way, I will be on vacation in August for 3 weeks because my partner, who is a triathlete, will be doing a world triathlon in Canada. So when people ask me how I can run for an hour, and I say, and I don't know how she can run for, or actually do all three, swim, bike, run, for 4 hours. And then there are, of course, people who do Ironmans who do that for 6 to 8 hours or more. Constant expansion. Mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. There are ways of ever expanding because that is the true nature. Our universe is actually still expanding also. So by the laws of nature, no matter what aspect we're talking about, there is continual expansion. And therefore, the difference between spiritual stagnation and spiritual growth is the lack. You know, stagnation would be the lack of expansion. Well, what expansion? Expansion of love, expansion of gratitude, expansion of grace, expansion of peace, all of those. How many remember What the Bleep? It's a movie that's at least 10 years old. You've probably seen what I'm going to show you multiple times, but I wanted to use it for today's lesson. And by the way, when I watch it, I always get more out of it anyway. So, here we go.
Welcome to Flatland.
Flatland.
Only two dimensions.
2 dimensions.
Only forwards and backwards, left and right.
Forwards, backwards, left and right.
In this world, there is no up and no down.
Right, where's Donkey? He said, well, she's out in line.
In this world, the two-dimensional beings that live here have no concept of three-dimensional objects. These two-dimensional flatlanders have no understanding of cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons, or yours truly. From their 2D perspective, my 3D finger looks something like this. Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown. Or should I say, not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box? Hello, little circle. Don't be afraid.
Where are you?
This is always the tricky part to explain. I'm in another dimension, another space. I am above you. What word? Above? Well, what do you think it means?
I don't know. And I don't want to know. You can be severely punished if you use that word. Are you a ghost?
I hope not. I just have a different perspective than you do. I can see things in a way you can't yet.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, okay, you have a safe in your pantry. And inside it, you have 12 coins, a bill, and a passport.
How did you know that? What are you? Are you a god?
Well, no more than you. You see, since I am above you, in the third dimension, I can see inside things in your world.
Third dimension? You are a crazy ghost. There's only 2. Look.
Sorry, if I were to touch the inside of your stomach, how would I do that?
Well, you'd have to cut through my skin. Otherwise, it's impossible. Stop! Stop!
Ready for more?
More what?
Dimensions.
Oh,
Directions.
no. Yes, but there aren't any. More? What will happen to me? What will I become?
You'd have to become it to know.
What is it like? You have to become it. There's so much to that clip, and by the way, this whole presentation, of course, will be available, and every time I listen to that segment, I get something more and more and deeper and deeper. Because, of course, it's silly to us, 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions, but I hope it's not hard for you to understand. We are in this 3rd dimension, and there are still people who doubt the 4th dimension, or whatever dimension we want to refer to as the spiritual dimension. And in the spiritual dimension, for us, it's like coming out of that 2D world. And there is a whole new universe for us to discover. So, what will transcending to that new dimension take? Discipline. Meaning, yes, you must become it. And in order to become it, I'm taking this from a book called Unveiled Mysteries. And I'm going to read a couple paragraphs, so be patient with me here. To give expression to discordant thoughts and feelings in oneself is the course of least resistance and the habitual activity of the undeveloped, undisciplined, and unwillful individual who refuses to understand the law of his own being and to bring the personal self, which is but his instrument of expression, into obedience to the law. He who cannot or will not control his thoughts and feelings is in a bad way, for every door of his consciousness is wide open to the disintegrating activities thrown off by other minds and emotions and other personalities. It takes neither strength, wisdom, nor training to give way to unkind, destructive impulses, and the full-grown human beings who do this are but children in their development of self-control. It is a blight upon the life of mankind that so little control of the emotions is taught humanity from the cradle to the grave. Attention to this particular point is the greatest need in the Western world today. It is easy to give way to discordant thoughts, feelings, and activities, to be sure, because the mass of mankind are submerged, as it were, by environment and association entirely created by themselves. The individual, though, through his control of the outer consciousness, must make the effort to rise out of his condition by his own free will in order to transcend these limitations permanently. And no one can hope to rid his life and world of misery, discord, and destruction until he leashes his own thought and feeling. In this way, he refuses to let the life flowing through his mind and his body become qualified by the discord resulting from every little disturbing occurrence in the world about him. At first, such discipline does require determined, continuous effort, for the thoughts and feelings of 95% of humanity run as uncontrolled and free as a little tramp dog. That's a little harsh. However, no matter how much effort it takes to bring these two activities under control, that's thought and feelings, it is worth any amount of time and energy expended, and no real permanent dominion of one's life and the world can take place without it. It will be my pleasure and privilege to teach you the use of these higher laws, and their application will enable you to release true wisdom and bring about all perfection. Are you all game for that? Is that why you're here? So I return to discipline, because that next dimension is not a dimension that you can have a formula for. meaning the expression of who you are in the world is your unique expression, and your pathway through your life. I still look back on experiences that I say, I couldn't understand why that situation happened to me. And then I can look back and say, while I'm living my life linearly, there are lots of pieces to the puzzle that begin coming together. But that's not going to happen without contemplation. And contemplation isn't going to happen without taking the time to get to know who you truly are, which I like the way Patricia says this. Once you begin living as the real you, you begin dissolving all those veils of illusion that you used to project your life through from the outer. You begin living from your true state of being, and it is from this space that your doing is effortless, natural, and even fun, because whatever you do from your true state of being is done in true inner peace, joy, and love that are of the Spirit, beyond the duality that contains the conditions that the ego mind puts on outer happiness. How many of you know this saying? Okay, all of you who've been in Science of Mind for a while know this is one of our common mottos. However, I also have to say to you, of course I believe in this and I'm not changing that, but what I am saying is when you're in that little circle in the flatland where you only believe in 2 dimensions, forward and backward and left and right, that little circle could have tried to change its thinking and never got outside the sphere of 2 dimensions. Does that make sense? So you can't, like a formula, think your way through to the next dimension. It's having the discipline of being. And I'll talk about some of the tools, of course. But the idea here is to change your thinking, change your life, is not just a mental, oh, I got to go find another book to read. If you're not doing spiritual practice, which many of us spoke about earlier, that spiritual practice is what leads us to the other dimension or the next dimension. And then you start not seeing, but seeing things anew. And what tends to happen, and I'm using a very simple example, is you may have a list of phone calls to make, and before you even get to the phone call is made to you. In other words, somebody mentioned the grace and synchronicity. It starts to happen, which then all the more affirms your faith, which then you go deeper with, and more of that begins to happen. Not to say that it's then all a smooth road, right? Where did you find that? I've been searching for it everywhere. A little jar of happiness inside. And the individual says, I created it myself. So what I read out of Unveiled Mysteries is, it's not going to happen outside. You can't search for it in the world. If you want to call it hidden, it's hidden deep within you. Which means you have to lead yourself to be disciplined enough to do your spiritual practices, to discover and to create and to lead yourself to that next dimension. So the one on the left is looking from the outside in. The one on the right is understanding it's from the inside out. So I was born in the Catholic faith, so of course used to many saints, but regardless of the religions, there are those that have mastered their inner knowing, their inner being. All of these words, and actually I found this on the internet, and I went, wow, that's fascinating. It just makes me want to get to know more of who these particulars are. Many of us, of course, may have heard of the different saints and Yogananda and Krishna and Jesus Christ and Buddha, etc., but wow, Who are all these other people? Fascinating. It's not, and of course, you know, for science of mind, when we talk about Jesus Christ, his last name was not Christ, it was he knew the Christ within. And that is true of each one of you. They would not say they were better than or that you cannot attain. They are expressing because they found it within. So I don't want an answer except that I do want seriously about 20 seconds of, so what is the difference between you and those other teachers or those other self-aware individuals?
More awareness.
They
One
don't
and the same.
recognize for their awareness.
Discipline, lack of practice,
Discipline.
mastery, self-discovery.
They aren't different from us.
They really aren't different from us. And as we were talking here, self-discovery and practice, they're just a little more practiced for that Ironman or triathlon or run, right? So now I'm calling on you to respond to yourself, not out loud. What are you committing yourself to for your spiritual growth to transcend and understand, stand under, and know within? How are you committing to your spiritual practice to continue the expansion of your spiritual growth?
Meditation.
Okay, I'm just asking people to hold it, meaning different people will have different pathways, but I want to make sure that you have enough time that you contemplate that and that you commit with discipline to a spiritual practice. Because it comes from the inside out. And at least my own spiritual path is that the more I do my spiritual practice, the more like the circle, I become the sphere and understand, wow, there is a whole different dimension out there to explore. And of course, lots of people are exploring the world from the outside. But if you close your eyes and open your mind, there is so much more of a richer, deeper, truer dimension. And of course, for those of you who've been in Science of Mind, you understand our symbol, where at the top of the V is spirit, the universal divine source, all intelligence, love, healing, perfection. And that exists in, as, through us. It is everywhere present. And the V represents that as we move that essence into our, I'll say, soul, our consciousness, then at the bottom come into form as the being that we are, expressing into the outer world that which is that divine expression that we started with. But that means contemplating that. That means for everything that's happening in your life, going back to the top. Because what tends to happen is we get down at the bottom of the V and there's a lot of details and a lot of things going on and we're trying to figure out how to juggle it all, and we forget while we're maneuvering through the minutia of this world that we need to bring ourselves back to the understanding of, oh yeah, I am the one. All that is needed is right here, right now, and then contemplating more of that. So that then divine grace does happen. And sometimes things even just show up. Or a new perspective comes about. So what kind of spiritual tools? Meditation, I believe, is very important, and of course, affirmative prayer. But there are many more aspects. I realized after I did this that music should be in there, certainly, singing, chanting, and all aspects of that. But moving yourself into the other dimension, not just the dimension of the body, not just the outer, but spending time doing your spiritual practice, and these being the practices that expand your awareness of who you truly are. And then, what would science say about all this? Because Sir Ernest Holmes, our founder, talked about how one day religion and science may become one. What does science show us about this? Let's see, I think I need to...
They're also very good for reducing...
It's about meditation.
...diseases, including depression, anxiety, pain, and insomnia. They also, there's a couple of very good studies demonstrating it can actually improve your ability to pay attention. And most interestingly, I thought virtually every study has shown that people are just happier. They report they're more satisfied with life, and they have a higher quality of life. And so this was interesting to me. And so I decided to switch and start doing this sort of research. And so as a neuroscientist, how could this be happening? How can you, something as silly as a yoga posture or sitting and watching your breath, how could that lead to all these sorts of different types of changes? So what we know is that whenever you engage in a behavior over and over again, that this can lead to changes in your brain. And this is what's referred to as neuroplasticity. And what this just means is that your brain is plastic and that the neurons can change how they talk to each other with experience. And so there's a couple of studies demonstrating that you can actually detect this using machines like the MRI machine. The first study was with juggling. They took people who had never ever juggled before, and they scanned them, and then they taught them how to juggle, and it said, keep practicing for 3 months. Then they brought them back after 3 months, and they scanned them a second time. And they found that they could actually detect with the MRI machine changes in the amount of brain matter in the brain of these people in areas that are important for detecting visual motion. So I thought, okay, 3 months, can we decide, can meditation change brain structure too? That's something as, as simple as, juggling. What about meditation? So the first study we did, we recruited a bunch of people from the Boston area, and these were not monks or meditation teachers, they were just average Joes who on average practice meditation about 30 or 40 minutes a day. And we put them in a scanner, and we compared them to a group of people who were demographically matched, but who don't meditate. And what we found is this, that there were indeed several regions of the brain that had more gray matter in the meditators compared to the controls. One of the reasons I'm going to point out to you is here in the front of the brain. Is an area that's important for working memory and executive decision making. And what's interesting about it was when we actually plotted the data versus their ages. So here in the red squares, that's the controls. And this is something you see actually, it's been well documented that as we get older, not just there, but across most of our cortex, it actually shrinks as we get older. And this is part of the reason why as we get older, it's harder to figure things out and to remember things. And what's interesting was that in this one region, the 50-year-old meditators had the same amount of cortex as the 25-year-olds, suggesting that meditation practice may actually slow down or prevent the natural age-related decline in cortical structure. So now the critics, and there were many critics, said, well, meditators, they're weird. Maybe they're just like that before they started practicing, right? Or a lot of them, they're vegetarians, so they didn't need to diet, lifestyle, could have possibly been meditation and something else, right? And to be fair, that could be true. This first study could not address that. So we did a second study. In this study, what we did is we took people who had never meditated before, and we put them in the scanner, and then we put them through an 8-week meditation-based stress reduction program, where they were told to meditate every day for 30 to 40 minutes. And then we scanned them again at the end of the 8 weeks, and this is what we found. So what you see is that several areas became larger. In this slide, you can see the hippocampus. And in the graph, the controls are in blue and the meditation subjects are in red. And what we see is that the hippocampus, and this is the area that's important for learning and memory, it's also important for emotion regulation. And what's interesting is there's less gray matter in this region in people who have depression and PTSD. Another region we identified was the temporal parietal junction, which is here above your ear. And it's important for perspective taking and empathy and compassion. And again, these are both functions which people report changing when they start practicing meditation and yoga. Another region we identified was the amygdala. And the amygdala is the fight or flight part of your brain. And here we actually found a decrease in gray matter. And what was interesting was that the change in gray matter was correlated with the change in stress. So the more stress reduction people reported, the smaller the amygdala became. And this is really interesting because it's sort of the opposite and parallel of what some animal studies have shown. So Chatterjee and colleagues using rodents, they took rodents who were just happy, normal rodents and had them in their cage, and they measured their amygdala, and then they put them through a 10-day stress regimen. And at the end of the 10 days, they measured their amygdala, and this exact same analogous part of their rat brain grew. So we found a decrease with stress, they found an increase with stress. What was interesting is that then they left the animals alone, and 3 weeks later they went back and tested them again. And 3 weeks later, that same part of the amygdala was still large, and the animals, even though they were in their original cages where they were happy, were still acting stressed out. So they, were cowering in the corner, and they weren't exploring the space the way they had before. And so this is the exact opposite of what we saw with the humans, because with the humans, nothing has changed with their environment. They still had their stressful jobs, all the difficult people in their lives are still being difficult, and the economy still sucks. But yet, their amygdala got smaller, and they were reporting less stress. And so together these really showed that the change in the amygdala is not responding to the change in environment, but rather it's representing the change in people's reaction and relationship to their environment. And then the other thing that the study shows us is that it wasn't just that people were saying, oh, I feel better, or that it was a placebo response, or that they're trying to please us, but there was an actual neurobiological reason why they're saying they felt less stressed. And so the idea that I'd like to share with all of you today,
What do you think? I love that based on the interaction we had earlier about how do you know spiritual growth, spiritual maturity, that if you go back and listen to that video, the stress reduction, seeing life differently, different perspectives, even the stress response, the reactivity. There were many things that we echoed here in the room, and that was research based on meditation. Have I convinced you yet? Yes. So, yes, life is about finding yourself with a capital Y, but it's also about creating yourself, in other words, the discipline to do your spiritual practice, to find that new dimension and to live from your true beingness. Namaste.